Time to chuck some shit. The power movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I can't believe it's spring already. Things are winding down in the world of snow, and the podcast will shift directions, and I'll hit everything from skate to the NFL to surf to music, and everyone I speak with will have a tie to action sports. Some stories will be funny, some stories will be heavy, and they all will be awesome. This week, it's more of a business episode. I talked to the founder of Squirrel Wingsuits, Matt Gerdes, and he's a pro base jumper, but you wouldn't notice any radness out of Matt when you see or meet him. And that's not an insult by any means. With most guys I chat with from the base world or from any of the action sports worlds, they almost have an aura around them, some kind of admirable carefreeness or an amazing personality. Well, I did not find that with Matt. He's just a regular guy, nice enough for sure. I will say he's the most guarded guest I've had, but I'll chalk that up to him owning a private company that deals with high-risk sports. We'll get into Matt's podcast in a minute. For now, I ask you to please follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement and share my posts. I realize that's something that's not happening, and I totally understand it. I don't share many things either. I will say this, if you like an episode, please share it. And while likes are cool, shares are way better. So thank you for whatever you can do. I also want to thank my sponsors. They are Evo, Rescue Water, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Unofficial Networks. They, along with you, make the show happen, so thank you. And now, let's talk to Matt Gerdes. So we are in West Seattle. We're about a mile from my house. I'm sitting with Matt Gerdes. He's a business owner, he's an innovator, he's an athlete. Matt, how long have you been in West Seattle?
It's been about 4 years now.
Where were you before here?
France. I was in the Alps for a long time. From about 2000 to 2013, I lived in first Austria and then the south of France and then in the Chamonix area.
Were you back and forth between here and France, or was it strictly over there?
That was my full-time residence. I did come back, usually a couple times a year to the States to visit, but I was living and working over there full-time. My house, my car, everything, my life was there for 13 years.
How was living in France, being an American in France in maybe the Bush era when people really didn't like our government the first time?
Yeah, that's actually really true. There was quite a bit of flack distributed when, George Bush was elected and then reelected. That was pretty embarrassing, but, almost nostalgic at this point. Not to get onto that topic at all, but France was cool. It was everything they say is true about the mountains. They're amazing, and the access is easier than any place on earth. So, as you know, when it comes to getting deep into big mountains, there's no place like the Alps. Hands down, it's just the best. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and that's what kept me there for so long, for sure.
You're the founder of Squirrel Wingsuits. Why don't you give us a 30-second overview that my mom could understand of what Squirrel Wingsuits is?
Okay, so you've probably seen images or videos of people flying squirrel suits through the air, wingsuits as they're called. And basically, it's just a tool that we use to fly further than you would normally in free fall. We still need a parachute to open at the end of our flight, and we still need to land that parachute. Can't land a wingsuit, really. So yeah, that's basically it. It's a tool to extend free fall a little bit, whether you're jumping from an airplane or from a fixed object like a cliff.
I think I saw some video where a guy tried to land on cardboard boxes once.
Yeah, he did it. 2012, British guy Gary Connery nailed that stunt. He was the first person to really do it well and live. He flew a real big wingsuit into a big pile of boxes.
And you say he was the one to do it well and live. Have people attempted it and not made it?
Well, a few people had accidentally landed their wingsuits and lived. Of course, lots of people have landed their wingsuits and died. He was the first person who planned it carefully and pulled it off rather elegantly, I would say. I mean, considering that it was sort of a crash landing, he did a great job and just walked away perfectly.
Okay. What is your title here at Squirrel?
I guess I am a co-founder.
And what do you do on like a day-to-day basis for a regular week when you're in town?
It involves a lot of sitting in front of my computer, communicating with our team, the people that work with us, and our customers. And when I'm not in front of the computer, a lot of the time I'm actually testing. I'm actively involved in the testing and design of all of our suits and equipment. And pretty often it involves traveling a little bit. We cruise around and jump with other people around the world and meet with them. A lot of the times we're involved in education efforts, doing skills camps and things like that at various drop zones. So yeah.
In terms of the company, it started out as a company out of necessity. The products weren't up to par for what you wanted to do. And we can talk about the development of that later, but it's grown into I won't say a big animal, because I guess I will, because it's squirrel, but it's grown into something that's much larger than just wingsuits. And you've come to disrupt a whole industry and really change the way people think about building product. And where I'm going with this is, how big is the company? Because you probably had 3 SKUs in the beginning. I think you had an advanced suit, middle of the road, and then an entry level came out a little later. But now you must have, 50, 60 products that you're selling?
I don't know if it's quite that many, but it's several dozen if you were to include accessories and stuff like that. But we did start with one model of wingsuit. And that one model of wingsuit was born out of the idea that we wanted something that wasn't available at the time. So I'd been jumping a lot using products from a company called Tony Suit, which is an American company based in Florida. I had a really good relationship with Tony and Tony Suits for a few years and loved their stuff. It just got to the point where I wanted something specific that wasn't really happening, and I sort of by chance was presented with the opportunity to have access to a production facility and start working on my own designs. So I grabbed it, and together with a friend, Dave Barlia, we sort of spent the first year prototyping and testing and trying to figure out how to make these things, how to make them better, and how to make them do what we want. After about a year of that, Dave Barlia decided to focus more on family than on work, and I brought on Mike Steen, and it's been him and I since as owners. And now we've got a pretty solid team of not only athletes, but employees around us that are just as good as I ever could have hoped for. That's the best part about our company, is for sure the people we work with.
Nice. Well, I'm going to hang on Mike Steen for a second. Is he Jewish? Because when you hear Steen, Stein, Stone, Burger, Man at the end of the name.
Pretty sure no. I think that he is not very religious, unless you were to call outdoor sports a religion.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying more Jewish in that does he celebrate Hanukkah more so?
Negative.
Is there a chosen person in the building?
Not that I'm aware.
There is. There's one right here. But that is quite all right. So how many trips do you go on a year doing your job? How often are you away from West Seattle? It looks like you have a wedding ring on, and I don't know if your husband or wife is bummed when you're traveling, but how long are you away from your partner?
You know what? If you were to ask me, I'd probably have an inaccurate answer, but if you were to ask my wife, you'd get an inaccurate answer as well. She tends to think that I'm gone all the time, and to me, it certainly feels like I'm not, but I think that it's rare for a month to go by that doesn't involve at least a short trip for me. Although I do like to stick around here in the Northwest in the summertime because it's paradise.
Speaking of paradise, you were born and raised, or at least born in paradise in Los Angeles, right?
Right. I was born in LA. I'm not sure if it's paradise. I grew up in southeast part of the city, a place called Bellflower, which not many people have heard of because it's not that awesome. I've lived in a lot of really cool places since, and definitely feel lucky.
Did you grow up in LA?
Yeah, until high school, pretty much.
What kind of sports were you into? Were you a skier? Did you play any team sports? What kind of things were you into as a kid?
Skiing. I was obsessed with skiing all through childhood, and that was sort of the gateway drug that brought me to everything else.
Where did you go ski?
Tahoe.
In terms of skiing, did you start at like 4 or 5 years old? Was your family into it?
Yeah, I started real young, toddler, and skied mostly like a tourist until I got sent away to boarding school in Colorado and joined a winter sports club there and raced alpine for a few years and really learned to ski, and then enjoyed it even more. As you know, you get better at something, you like it more. And when my family moved to Washington State, I definitely continued being obsessed with it, skiing here in the Cascades.
What did you do to get sent to boarding school?
You know what? I'm not sure. I was pretty young. I think that it was a combination of things. I probably made some noise about wanting to go to some form of school where I could ski more, and that instantly turned into... It
was a ski thing.
Yeah, I mean, boarding school was pretty much all about skiing, and we got to ski a lot there. It was also where a lot of kids that weren't functioning well in their school or home got sent, but I don't think I was too much of a problem child. I think it just...
that was more of a want than you have to go to boarding school?
Pretty much.
Did you get in any trouble growing up?
Nothing too serious.
Okay. No arrests of note or anything?
No arrest record, which is pretty awesome.
When you're young, I read that you were obsessed with flying and you'd saw a picture of Frank Gambale, and that print picture, a little tiny piece of paper, inspired you.
Yeah, that was back in the day of, photos were on paper. And I can't remember, exactly where I saw that the first time, but I was definitely obsessed with it. And then I met Frank Gambale in Tahoe, which was cool, tuned to skis. Yeah, it was a while from that point where I first discovered the idea of base jumping until the point where I actually had enough time and money, mainly money, to, get a few skydives and start the process of learning it.
So you're 19, you see this picture. Were you a risk-taking kid? I mean, being a skier, I'm sure, were you a skier that was chasing all the crazy people at Squaw around the mountain and hucking yourself off cliffs there and just living that lifestyle?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I aspired to ski hard and loved the people around us in Tahoe that were sort of, I hate to say it, well, definitely pioneers, lots of them, right?
Yeah.
You're intimately familiar with that whole crew, I think. Skiing was just really all I cared about for a long time, but on the side, I climbed in the off season and stuff like that. So to me, base jumping didn't seem that completely insane. It just seemed like another outdoor sport, another mountain sport. And the people that I knew that were into it saw it the same way, I think. So yeah, I don't really think it was like a case of me being a crazy teen or anything like that. It was more just seeing it as maybe the ultimate mountain sport.
In the world of teens, there's people like yourself who are hucking themselves off cliffs skiing. And there's people that look at that shit in the magazines and are like, no way, I'll never do that. So you're probably in the top 10% of that age group of taking risks. But it's natural to you as well. So you probably don't see it as anything different than what you normally do. It's a progression of things, I would think. And yeah, I mean, if you're going to huck yourself off a 40-foot cliff into a questionable landing at 19, when you get older, if you have the right gear, what's going to stop you from jumping off a 400-foot cliff if you know you can land it?
It just gets easier with a parachute, actually.
While you might not be a risk taker compared to kids your age, you might have been not a negative risk taker in like, I'm going to get wasted and go crash this car. Different kind of risk. I hear you're a really smart guy who'd like probably stay up reading philosophy late at night and one of those types of people, which is great. That's not me by any means, but did you do well in school?
I did okay. Yeah, not really well, but I definitely got by.
What did you do right after high school?
I smoked a lot of weed and skied. I was so obsessed with skiing that in my junior and senior year, going to a really tiny public school in the boonies of Washington State, I actually conned my high school counselor into letting me take homeschool classes. This is back in the day where you'd get like a Scantron test and a textbook in the mail. Mm-hmm. And because there was no supervision and the school was actually incredibly low quality, the counselor let me take all the tests open book, which meant that the entirety of my junior and senior year, mainly what I was doing was copying answers onto the Scantron sheet and putting them back in the mail so I could get out of school at 9:30 in the morning and ski Stevens Pass for the rest of the day.
Wow. That's a dream for a high school kid, right? Especially one who's into skiing. So you're smoking weed and skiing after high school, which is great. I think that every high school kid should engage in a little bit of that. You can either do it after high school or after college if you choose to do that, but don't enter the real world right away because then you'll be stuck there the rest of your life. How long are you able to just burn and turn?
Yeah, so it was a few years of college and skiing mixed together until I moved to Europe permanently and mainly skied, took up paragliding, and then skiing and paragliding were a big focus until I finally had the money to start skydiving.
And paragliding helps get you that money, right? You work in that industry for 12 years with Ozone paragliders.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just doing a little bit of work in the paragliding scene and starting out with Ozone back in the early 2000s did give me a little bit of money to do a few skydives with. And when I say a few, I think I mean 11 before my first base jump, which is
ridiculous.
Pretty silly, yeah.
Yeah, because I talked to Matthias recently. Shane McConkey had given him advice and said, hey, you need to do 100 skydives before you base jump. That's what's safe. And Matthias did, I think, 25. So you did 11.
Yeah, I think that we tell people 200, and 200 is not enough sometimes. 200 probably wouldn't have been enough for me. 11 was just plain stupid, and I survived only thanks to luck on several occasions.
Well, you're not a risk taker.
Yeah, right. So, Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in skydiving that are so critical to base that are often overlooked. And there wasn't as much information available back then. So I didn't really know how big of a mistake I was making by rushing my progression like that, which made it easier to make the mistake.
And when you're 23 years old, that makes it easier too.
Cake.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, hey, that looks fun. I'm going to do it. So you get your 11 skydives, and then do you just take to base jumping? Is that what you do?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I did 11 skydives in a few days at a drop zone in France called Gap Tallard. And the guys there were pretty cool. They knew that I wanted to base jump and that I was a paraglider and stuff like that. And I knew a few of them through paragliding. Finished 11 jumps after a few days, and they're like, sweet. I was like, thanks. See you guys later. And they're like, where are you going? I was like, Lauterbrunnen. And their jaws dropped. It was pretty funny. Yeah, went base jumping.
That first base jump, who were you with?
My good friend, Jimmy Hall.
And when you land that, are you high-fiving, game on, like we're doing this and that's it from here on out?
Yeah, we were completely obsessed. We spent about 6 weeks jumping every single day and jumped the Eiger early that first year. I mean, that's how it all started. Like, if we were to back up a little bit, we'd go back to the spring of that year when Jimmy was telling me that he was going to go base jump the Eiger, the north face of the Eiger. And I was just like, whoa, you can do that? I know what the Eiger is. You can actually jump off the Eiger with a parachute. And he's like, yeah, man, it's freaking awesome. And I can't wait to do it. It's going to happen in August. And this is like in May. And I was like, shit, can I come? He's like, well, yeah, you just got to learn to base jump first. And I was like, all right. And I was like, I've been wanting to do this for a while. I'm finally going to make it happen. And I drove down the road, hit up that drop zone, Tallard. And yeah, a week later.
So it all happened pretty quickly for you. Is it one of those things where you're just driving down the road in a car, you see some crazy building that you're some crazy antenna you can get up on, you're like, pull over, we're doing that?
Base jumping is like that, really. There are almost an unimaginable variety and number of objects that you can jump from, way more than most people realize. For me, it's almost always been mainly about cliffs. I'm not a technician or a specialist when it comes to low stuff or antennas and buildings. I have all of those jumps, I have all those objects, but I think 80+% of my jumps are big alpine cliffs. So stuff where we're using a slider up, so the parachute opens a little bit softer for higher airspeed openings, and mainly in alpine environments. That's kind of been my thing.
I guess it's tough to ask you who your influences are because you did it so fast. If you were to look back, did you have any mentors or people that you were looking to for guidance?
Yeah, base jumping was considerably more underground back then, so it's not like there were published heroes in the sport. There was no Facebook, there was no YouTube, there was the internet, of course, but base jumping on the internet was confined mainly to a forum that was largely anonymous and full of mean people. So it's not like we could get a lot of information. And my heroes for base jumping were just the people that I knew that had more experience than me. Obviously, initially Frank Gambale, he was like the super rad, the original Red Bull base athlete.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have a chance to jump with him. Then it was Jimmy Hall. Jimmy Hall is who basically brought me through the first few months of my career together with his friend Gray Fowler, who had more experience than both of us and was kind of keeping us alive, I guess, for the first summer.
In terms of like before I even get into your progression, I got to take a break and talk about my sponsors real quick.
And my first sponsor is Evo. And if you haven't shopped at evo.com or been to one of their stores in Denver, Seattle, or Portland, you're missing out on the best retail and online experience in the country. While that's a bold statement, it is true. Evo carries the best brands, has the best prices, and best people working for them. The retail environment is inviting and inclusive, and they are all about making sure you have the best products for whatever party or adventure you're going on. On the web front, Evo offers a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy. And their website is best in class. For listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. When you check out, type in the code capital TPM, the number 10, that's all one word, and you will get that 10% off. My next sponsor is Rescue Water, and they are proactive recovery. What does that mean? Well, there's no drink out there that will hydrate you better than a Rescue Water. It's science and it works. Think of it like this. When you need a pick-me-up, you drink a soda or a cup of coffee. But when you really need an energy kick, you grab yourself an energy drink. Well, with Rescue Water, it's a similar principle. When you need to hydrate, like after your skate session, workout, practice, bike, hike, or mountain time, Skip the sports drink and drink a cold rescue water. There's no better choice for replacing electrolytes, and it's a difference that you'll feel immediately. I like to drink a cold one before bed after big nights out, and it's a lifesaver. It only takes drinking one once to be a believer, and becoming a believer is easier than ever. All you need to do is head over to rescuewater.com and enter the code RESQ WATER TPM, all one word, and you'll save 20% on a 12-pack case. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon and Amazon Prime.
Those are my sponsors, so we can get back at it with your life. When I talk about base jumping to people who are into it, and you're very calm and reserved compared to most people, you talk to Matthias and he's like a bubble of energy and you're just like chill. Miles is the same way. You aren't that way, but when I talk to them a lot, when I bring up base jumping, it feels like I'm bringing up heroin to a drug addict. They just get so excited and they can't stop talking about it, and you can just see the energy in them when they're talking about their jumps. And how is it different than, because I love skiing and I don't get that way about skiing, but it seems like everybody does about base jumping. And is there a difference in the adrenaline or emotion that you're feeling when you do these things?
It's really similar. I mean, I know a little bit about your ski background, so you know exactly the feeling that we get base jumping. I'll tell you that right now, for sure. It's having completed something that's challenging, has a little bit of inherent risk, and required a lot of preparation or at least forethought, right? And it's satisfying, it's calming, and it's just awesome. So base jumping is the same as a lot of other sports. I think that if you were to take the amount of emotion that you'll experience through like a 30-second ski run and compress it down to a 10-second base jump, it's just a little more concentrated.
I could see that. So on a yearly basis, before you start wingsuiting, how many jumps do you think you're getting? Like per year? A couple hundred?
When I was living in Europe, I was not very good at logging, so I conservatively estimated my jump numbers at about 100 base jumps per year, which is for sure low, but I'd rather be low than high. You know, sometimes you can do 30 to 40 base jumps easily in a week in some places like Lauterbrunnen where there's easy access. And sometimes it's one a day, only a few times a week because the hikes are long and the weather's complicated. Nowadays, I skydive a lot more than I base jump. So I think I'm getting right around 400 or so skydives a year.
When do you first see wingsuits? And when do you say, I want to try that? Because I wonder if it's a progression or if it's something where just one day you're like, I'm going to try it. Or are you building up for that?
Well, when I started base jumping, wingsuit base jumpers were like a tiny, tiny fringe group of complete nut jobs, right? Like It wasn't even like the beginning of my base career, wingsuit base jumping was barely a thing. Like there's literally a handful of people. I spent most of my time base jumping in those early years in the most popular places for base jumping, and there would only be 2 or 3 wingsuit base jumpers in the Lauterbrunnen Valley, for instance, at a time, max. So they were a little intense. I knew that I needed more skydiving experience to get into a wingsuit for base jumping, and I knew that that was expensive and time consuming, and I didn't have the time or the money in the first part of my base jumping career. So I wasn't in a big hurry about it. It took me a few years of base jumping to decide that, I was thinking it's time for the wingsuit. And that same year, my friend Jimmy Hall died right in front of me, flying a wingsuit. And then a couple weeks later, a good friend of mine, Stefan Oberlander, known as Obi, also died right in front of me, flying a wingsuit. And I was just like, whoa, this shit is dangerous. Way more dangerous than just base jumping. And sort of it reframed the sport for me in a way and made me cautious and skeptical. And I moved into wingsuit base jumping pretty slowly after that.
So when you're planning for your first wingsuit base jump, because I'm sure there's a lot of thought that goes into like, hey, I'm going to do this. Is there one person that you're looking to give you guidance on wingsuiting? Or at that point, are you using just the knowledge and everything that you have and then what you've learned from others along the way?
You know what? My very first wingsuit base jump was without any particular guidance from anyone. It was at Mount Brento in Italy, and I was scared out of my freaking mind. I'd gotten, I think, 75 wingsuit skydives before that point and was feeling pretty comfortable in it, but I was a long way from being a competent wingsuit pilot. So the first season was just jumping off the cliff, flying straight, and trying to live. And
you were able to accomplish that as we're talking here today.
Yeah.
Your first wingsuit jump, you're doing it in a plane first and jumping out of a plane. But is it one of those things where you have to go up and pony up for a wingsuit first? Is there something you can use, or how does that work? Because you have to pay $2,000 to decide you want to even try it.
Yeah, so nowadays it's a little more structured and there's a lot more information and options out there. But once you have 200 skydives, then you can do your wingsuit first flight course, right? So it wasn't always like this. It was a little bit less regulated. And even today, it's not exactly strict. But there's the United States Parachute Association. The USPA says we need 200 skydives before we can do the first skydive wearing a wingsuit. And for that first skydive, normally you're with an instructor and you're renting a student suit. That's something really small. So the difficulty of flying a suit is correlated with the amount of surface area, how big the wings are, right? So your first couple jumps are going to be on a suit with really small wings together with an instructor. After that, you can move up to a slightly larger surface area suit and start jumping by yourself. And then it's just a question of practice.
So it's like sailing. You start with the small little sunfish,
exactly.
Figure out the wind, and then you go.
Totally.
But you can die, and you don't die sailing.
Yeah.
So 2010 comes around. You put an edit out, the September sessions, and that blows a lot of people's minds in the way that you're flying a wingsuit, because you pick calculated lines, like almost ski lines, where you're not doing crazy stuff going through holes and different shit like that, but it's just calculated, precise, and it's opened a lot of minds to what's possible in a wingsuit. And when you put that together, did you realize it was going to have the reaction in the BASE community or the wingsuit community that it did?
I didn't really think too much about the reaction, I guess, but I did for sure think about wingsuit base jumping exactly the way I think about skiing, which is, painting a line down a mountain and, faster, better, bigger turns, more fun, stuff like that. So yeah, that's funny that you say that. Definitely was thinking about skiing during those years. And
in terms of the different types of base jumping, I think you have experience with pretty much everything. I mean, ski base jumping seems like a natural fit for you based on you being a hardcore skier and a hardcore base jumper. It just makes sense. Did you get into doing a lot of that?
Yeah, I was super obsessed with ski base jumping early on, like 2005-06. I was just so geeked on it. And I emailed Shane McConkey kind of out of the blue. I think it was 05. It was the year he blew his hip out tomahawking because he was in bed. And I emailed him. He's like, man, I'm just sitting here in bed. I just had this major injury. I've got nothing going on for the next 6 weeks. And he kind of led me on this email tour of ski base jumping the Alps. And he's like, okay, go here. And I'd send him a photo of me base jumping, or ski base jumping that cliff. And he'd be like, crazy, sick, nice work. All right, now go here. And I'd go to the next place. And yeah, just went around Switzerland and France for, the last part of that winter. And that stuff is fun, man. I mean, there is nothing quite like the feeling of just rocketing off the edge of the cliff into free fall and having it stop so gently and easily, as opposed to trying to stick it. It's a lot easier with a parachute, gotta say.
It just sounds so funny that, had you met Shane before?
I hadn't met him before that. I emailed him randomly and he replied, which I was so psyched about. I mean, I met him later.
And he was pretty much being your puppet master, and he's Shane McConkey, so it's like, it's pretty fucking cool.
He was the ultimate guide. I was really fired up and super thankful.
And he was like that, it seemed like, with his time, with anybody who had a question.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, I'm going to answer it and make sure I give you my take on it, and you can go from there.
Yeah, he was thorough. I mean, he would send me videos and really specific instructions, and lots of beta. It was really cool.
We're here to talk about business too. When do you realize that the gear's not good enough?
I hesitate to say that it wasn't really good enough because that's so subjective, and it was certainly working for a lot of people.
So it gets to a point where you feel you can improve on the gear. You're using stuff that you like, but you think there's some tweaks that you can make, and you're not the manufacturer at that point. I think you're using Tony suits, and you're happy with them, but think, hey, there's a couple things I'd tweak. I'm going to make my own stuff. Is that kind of how the thought process went?
Yep, that's pretty much how it went down. We saw some improvements, and they weren't really happening at the rate that we wanted them to. So with, an opportunity to use the same production facility, or to use Ozone's factory, essentially, we had the opportunity to start a company. The first product was just one suit. It was sort of the suit that I wanted at that time. So it was kind of for experienced jumpers. By today's standards, it was terrible, but by the standards of 2012-13, it was pretty decent. So we actually were surprised by the amount of interest. We always have to put this into relative terms because It's obviously the world's smallest sport, but quite a few people in the world's smallest sport were excited about the idea of a new option. The company grew way faster than anyone was really expecting it to.
And what do you think the market was at that point?
In number of people? Or,
yeah.
It's hard to say, man. I mean, it's really difficult in the absence of really structured base jumping organizations and insurance statistics and things that give us good metrics. We can only guess based on anecdotes, right? If all the wingsuit companies came together and shared sales numbers, then we'd have a pretty good idea of how many people there are, but we don't. And I think that then it might have been a little optimistic to say that there were more than 1,000 active wingsuit base jumpers in the world.
Yep.
I don't think there were. I think it was in the hundreds, as in less than 1,000. And now maybe it's doubled in size. It's really hard to say.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
When you start Squirrel, it's with Luke Armont and Dave Barelia.
Yeah, Dave Barley and I were the key personnel for the first year of development, prototyping. We had a lot of help from the Ozo R&D team, Luke Armont and Fred Pieri, who are much, much smarter than us and much more experienced in gliding flight, also in pattern making. So they were crucial in helping us get our patterns functional, not only from the point of view of flight, but also from manufacturing.
Okay.
And then, it spread from there.
There's a lot of science involved in this. It's not just like, hey, we can put a pattern on it like this and it'll work. I mean, you don't have, I don't believe, have the schooling that some of these guys that you're working from the paragliding world had.
That's a really important point. There is some science involved. There's some art as well, for sure. And there's a lot of trial and error. But when you get a little help from real life engineers and people who actually understand fluid dynamics and aerodynamics and things like that, it can make a difference. And that's been part of our success over the past 5 years.
And was it a leap of faith for you guys? Because I don't know if you're still working for the paragliding company, but when you start a company, you have to invest your time, heart, soul, money.
Yep.
Everything goes into it. It's probably scarier than jumping at the end of the day for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally invested all of those things, all of those things you just mentioned. And it was definitely stressful. It's still stressful.
When did you realize that it was going to work? How many months in did you realize, like, hey, people like us and we're going to eat tomorrow?
I still don't really spend much time thinking about or considering that we might be successful. It always feels like we're struggling. It's healthier that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you hungrier.
In the same way about base jumping, I spend more time thinking about the things that could go wrong than I do about enjoying it. And even though it's still fun, I think it helps keep us safe and on track.
But when did that happen for you? I mean, I'm sure that wasn't happening when you were 23. I mean, you probably hit your early 30s and then you start thinking about life and choices.
Yeah, I think that whole thinking about consequences more happened earlier for me than it might for some adults, because when you lose close friends and they die right in front of you or close to you or whatever, it will affect you for sure. A lot of people think that they're not affected or don't realize it. But yeah, it will change your life outlook. And having close calls of my own and losing close friends, it sort of reframed my perspective on the sport.
Death is something you guys call it going in, right?
Yeah.
I talked to Matthias. He said he personally knew 40 people that have gone in the sports. And to me, that is just a ridiculous number. I would think you probably know more than 40.
Yeah, a few years ago, I actually combed through the list, and it was something like that. I haven't done that for a while. But, it's close friends is one thing. People that I've jumped with or had a beer with, that's a much larger number. Yeah, but it definitely is. It's a really fucked up sport in that regard.
It's something that you have to expect. It's not what if, it's when. And are you at the point where you can say they went doing what they loved? Because, I mean, that's what a lot of people say when people go. You can get by a little bit thinking that, but really then you see the aftermath, and that's when you realize the people that loved him don't have him anymore. It's something that it's happened before, it's going to happen again, and you have to deal with it every time.
I deal with it poorly, like most people. There's no secret. There's no good way to deal with it. Obviously, some people would say there's good and bad ways to deal with it. But I guess I should say there's no easy way to deal with it. And I haven't found a formula or a thought process that helps me feel less pain or less regret. It's awful every single time.
And then in terms of your career with close calls. I know you have to have had some because that's how you learn in the future. And if you're still here, that means they were close calls that you walked away from.
Yeah.
Have you had some scary moments?
Definitely had a few. And what you just said is a really important point, because I think a lot of base jumpers really learn a solid and valuable lesson just a half second before they die. And that's a bummer, because what base jumping can teach you, if you're not paying really close attention, is that things can go terribly wrong and then work out and be okay, right? My friend Chris McNamara summarized that really well in an essay a few years ago, where he wrote about the fact that he had several close calls in base jumping, but they felt like thrills to him, and he didn't understand how severe or valuable they were. Unfortunately, a lot of base jumpers don't learn until they go in. And I think that the differentiator is mostly luck. I was luckier than a lot of people have been, but also I was lucky to have the perspective of paragliding, a deeper understanding of micrometeorology and mountain weather, which is a huge part of base jumping that is overlooked by most base jumpers. And I was lucky enough to have had a couple decades of mountain sport experience before I got into this. And I think that's the source of most of my luck. But my close calls were all the result of bad judgment, every single one.
When you say a close call, do you hit something?
I think one that was like early and formative and revelatory was in the Gorge du Verdon in France, in the south of France. I had a girlfriend who base jumped, and she was there, and it was early in our like hangout period, and I really wanted to impress her. There were other jumpers around that I didn't know very well, and I wanted to impress them, and I wanted to do something cool. I didn't have video. That wasn't a part of it, because, video cameras back then were like huge clunky tape things. But regardless, I wanted to do cool shit. And I was like, I'm going to do a gainer. I'd done plenty of gainers on skis, and then I knew I could. It's easy. How much harder can it be when you don't even have to land it, really, right? So hucked off, threw a gainer, and was instantly standing straight up on my feet, because that's how you land a gainer on skis, and that's what I was used to. And a millisecond after that, I was on my back with the cliff behind my head. And then I was panicking, and I rolled to my belly, and now I'm looking at the cliff with it really, just a couple of feet in front of my face, rocks going by. And then I looked down and I saw the talus, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is exactly what it feels like to die, because I'm about to die. And I pitched my parachute, and it opened off heading. So I was facing the cliff, but my parachute opened in the wrong direction, which was the right direction in this case. And I just flew away a few feet above the talus, a few inches away from the cliff. And, my fingertips throbbing from the adrenaline shot, and landed next to my girlfriend, who was just like, you are so fucking stupid. She was just kind of shaking her hand, shaking her head, just like, oh my God. Everybody watching was sure that I was going in, and I was sure too. And yeah, lots of lessons there for sure. Showing off, trying to do cool shit that you don't know how to do, pushing yourself without any background or preparation that's specific to what you're doing, thinking that your experience in other areas of life qualifies you for this area of life. Not true.
Did you get laid that night?
I can't remember.
You're also looked at as kind of a mad scientist of the base jumping world. I mean, a lot of the prototypes and things that are made here, who tests those?
Me. Yeah, so all of our wingsuit prototypes are made in my size first for the most part, unless it's something specific that one of our team pilots wants to work on. But all of our race suits and new mainstream products are made in my size. And luckily, there's a few other people on our team that are similar enough to me to where we can pass the suits around.
Okay.
So it ends up being kind of a team effort for sure. But yeah, since the beginning, I've taken the sort of the first slot.
And has there ever been a prototype where you are in the air and you're like, oh, this sucks?
Yeah, when something's bad, it only takes one jump to figure it out usually.
Yeah.
Nothing unflyable. Definitely a few suits that sucked or didn't work, but those are really valuable. We learn more from things that don't work than we do from things that do work. So no regrets there for sure.
So I'm going to take my final sponsor break. And my last sponsor brews beer, drinks beer, and has fun doing it, period. They're the 10 Barrel Brewery, and they're based out of Bend, Oregon. They live and breathe the ski and snowboard culture and back that up with their checkbook by supporting countless events and nonprofits in the world of snow, including Jeremy Jones's Protect Our Winters Foundation. Their next event is right around the corner, and it's quickly becoming one of the largest backcountry festivals in the country. It's Vert Fest, and it's happening on April 7th at Mount Bachelor, and it's one of those events you don't want to miss. You know 10 Barrel will be there drinking beer outside, and they want you to join them. If you can't make the event, but still want some live 10 Barrel flavor, they have pubs in Bend, Denver, San Diego, Boise, and Portland, and right now you can try their limited Pica run in all pubs. It's been dubbed the Lord of the Sours, and it's a refreshing burst of fruit flavor. You can find out more about Vert Fest, Pica, and all things 10 Barrel over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into your life.
You compete a little bit as well. I see the Red Bull Aces, third place over there. But I would think the competitions in the wingsuit world are more of a gathering of friends. And I can imagine, the wingsuit stuff that goes on is crazy and everybody gets fired up. But I can imagine it gets just as crazy outside of actually flying. I mean, it's a bunch of calculated loose cannons
Yeah.
who like to have a good time. And are you part of that crowd as well? I mean, are you going to go late at night and first chair, last call kind of guy?
I'm old now. A while ago, maybe, yeah. But it's been kind of a long time since I was really into the party scene, I guess. But yeah, the competition thing for wingsuits is really fun and a lot more serious than anybody was expecting when the first events sort of hit the scene. The first Red Bull Aces people were excited, but the 60 people that were invited didn't really prepare much, It's like, okay, we're going to go do this wingsuit race. We kind of understand what the concept is and it sounds exciting and serious, but no one really trained specifically for it. The next year was different. When people saw how much hype there was around it and how much fun it really was and who was interested, the following 2 years got pretty intense. And people started training specifically for the event. We at Squirrel and other companies developed suits specifically for the event, just made to go fast, balls out in a slalom environment. And all the best pilots were there. So it stayed fun, but there was quite a bit of seriousness involved for sure.
So the competitiveness of people was brought out that you usually don't see on these things?
Yeah, I mean, people are really competitive in this sport, and there was a lot of game face happening.
Eventually you merge with Martin Tilley, or Marty, and I hear he's kind of like Doc from Back to the Future, got a lot of great ideas, but he's been the premier parachute builder in the U.S. for a long time, right?
He's one of the base riggers that has the most experience. There's only 2 or 3 guys on the planet that have as much base rigging experience as he does, and he's been sort of a solo operation, or at least a small shop operation, for a long time. I jumped his gear for a long time, for 10 years or so before going to Squirrel, but for sure one of the best things, straight up the best thing that's happened to us on the base gear side for sure is having Marty come on board. We're really excited to work with him, and he's made a real difference on our stuff.
And it sounds like he's one of those guys where if you ordered a suit from him today and he was on his own still, you might get it next year or a year and a half from now. But now working with you guys, he can have rapid prototypes and actually get some stuff turned pretty quick.
You could split Squirrel kind of into 2 categories. There's our wingsuits and kind of everything else. And the wingsuits are non-load bearing. Whether they're used in base jumping or the skydiving environment, they're just wingsuits and they're independent from the rest of the equipment. And then we've got the load bearing equipment, and that involves parachutes and harness container systems and the associated accessories that go with that stuff. So Marty helps us out with all the load bearing stuff specifically.
Okay.
He's not really involved in the wingsuit thing, but his input on the load bearing equipment over the past few years has been totally invaluable. And yeah, so when he was operating as, just the small shop Asylum, he did have, famously long delays. You could wait 6 to 12 months for a container system. You always paid for it. There were not really deals. And when you got it, it was going to be perfect, and I have his gear still that, is 10, 12 years old or more actually at this point. And it's so incredibly well made. Like how many examples can you think of where the owner of the company, he himself takes your order, answers the phone, works through the order process with you, and then goes and makes it by hand?
You don't get that very often, and that does explain why you might wait a long time for your products.
And he was the only one in base jumping that was doing it, pretty much. There's a couple smaller examples nowadays, but for a long time, he was that prime example of, the artisan The guy that owned the business, made everything himself, and did it to an extraordinarily high standard. So that's the reason I loved his shit, apart from the fact that he's an amazing person and has been a really important. We talked earlier about mentors, and when it comes to base jumping, he would be my number one, mentor for sure, as far as outlook and education and equipment, all that stuff. So in some ways, before we joined forces with him, Squirrel was the opposite. We offered fewer options on our equipment. We make in a large production facility. Squirrel is very different from Asylum in the sense that we're a bigger company with fewer options and less customization and shorter delivery times. So what we wanted to do is get Marty's experience and his sort of artisanal mindset injected into our equipment. And it worked well for him because now all of a sudden he has access to a massive, range of materials and testing ability and, big stable of team pilots. So it was just a match made in heaven.
So it's like you've given him Willy Wonka's factory and he's Willy Wonka.
Firepower, yeah.
Since you brought him on, it seems like the product range has expanded and you guys are doing well. In terms of money, I'm sure you're not going to give me any answers here, but I'm going to try. First, do you have any paying sponsors?
For me personally?
Yeah.
No.
Have you ever had paying sponsors?
Not money, just gear.
But you do get paid with your commercial work.
Yeah.
And is that a lucrative thing for you? I mean, you're putting your life on the line for like Dory or Nemo or something like that.
Those are the funnest jobs for sure, because the idea is that you're doing something relatively simple. You're operating at 60 to 70% of your capabilities. You don't want to be working on a commercial film shoot operating at 90+% of what you're capable of. That's just a recipe for disaster because there's cameras involved. The conditions are never exactly perfect because you're on a shooting schedule, not a weather condition schedule. And it's really important that you just choose a simple, achievable task that's going to look good from the perspective of whoever's shooting it, right? But yeah, that is probably one of the funnest ways that a person can make money, I think.
A lot of hurry up and wait, and then that's what you do for fun, but they're going to pay you 1,000,000 times more than anybody else because no one else is paying you to do it.
Yeah, it's brilliant, really. It's awesome. For the past few years, I've mostly been passing that work off to other people because I'm too busy, right? Like there's a cost-benefit analysis when it comes to taking myself out of the company for 3 to 5 days or whatever it takes to do a shoot. It's not worth it a lot of the time. The first one was huge thanks to Dave Barlia for getting me onto that job. That was just amazing. What a fun way to make extra cash.
And then you have the business, and overall, in terms of the success of the business, is it a viable future where you just see this thing growing? I mean, you see the numbers of the sport growing as well?
Who knows? There are plenty of risks. I never really take the future for granted. We take it day by day. We have a long-term outlook in the sense that we want our gear to last and we want the legacy of the company to be positive. And we treat every interaction with all of our customers with a lot of care and attention. It's not like people are just ordering shit on our site and receiving equipment. There's a conversation with almost every order, and we like to know exactly what people plan to do with the stuff. So yeah, we take it day by day. We take it seriously and try to think long-term, but not in the sense that this is going to work forever.
You constantly have to innovate. I mean, if you don't, you'll die. I have one more part of the show that we haven't gotten to yet. I call it Inappropriate Questions. I had Matthias. I can never say his last name. It's like Giraud, but I call him Gerard. So I had Matthias come up with 3 inappropriate questions for you. And Matthias is pretty good at doing inappropriate stuff.
No one better.
So there's a lot of questions you're going to try to walk away from, but I'm not allowed to let you walk away from these. Matthias, I want you to make him extra uncomfortable if you can, and let me know what question number 1 is for Matt.
Okay, question number 1. If you could put a penis anywhere on your body aside from where it should normally be, where would it be?
A pianist?
A penis.
A penis. Okay. I thought you were talking about piano. Again. No, I heard you completely. I was just messing with you.
Sorry, it's my accent. I'm never sure.
That is a French accent, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You like freedom fries?
You guys call them French fries, but French fries don't even come from France. They come from Belgium. So once again, it reflects the poor education of a lot of Americans.
So there you go. If you could have a penis anywhere on your body other than where it's supposed to be, where would you put that penis?
First of all, putain de merde, mec, enculé, quoi. Incroyable. Okay, so I guess I would put one on each of my elbows, and then I would Muay Thai Matthias in each ear.
Okay, I like it. The dual skull fuck through the elbows. Nice. You can press play on there and we'll get question number 2.
Question number 2. Ooh. If you could say anything to Donald Trump, what would it be?
All right, getting political right there, Matt. Be very calculated with your answers.
All right. Well, without being too specific, I'd say thank you.
Taking the easy route out there. Maybe that's a nod to what he did for small business.
So question number 2 is a political one. We are going to go to question number 3. Matthias, let's make this very, very inappropriate.
All right. If you were going to be invited at an S&M party, what would you want to try?
Wow. That's poetry right there to inappropriate questions.
I think I should preface that with, have you been to an S&M party first?
No.
Okay.
Never.
Now we can go on to his question. If you were invited to one, what would you wear?
What would I wear?
Or no, what would you want to try? Sorry, not
try?
what would you wear?
Let's see. Gosh, I guess that's a long list, but what can I choose from that list without getting in too much trouble? I guess I would definitely... I'm more the S side than the M side when it comes right down to it.
Okay.
I would want Matthias to be there, for sure.
Okay.
I would need him to be tied up, definitely. And I would need tools and lots of lube. Just let your imagination run wild, and probably still not there, but close enough.
All right, so Matthias, a bunch of tools and some lube, and that's all Matt needs to have a good time at the S&M party. Matt, I want to thank you for your time on the podcast.
Thanks, Mike.
So that was time with Matt Gerdes, and like I said in the intro, he was guarded, and I'm not really sure why. We didn't mention money much in the podcast, but I met a dude recently who had to deliver something to Matt's house, and he said Matt lived in an incredible property on the water. Given I wasn't there, so I'm not 100% sure how beautiful the property was, but based off his office location and size and what I heard from my buddy, I believe Matt Gerdes is absolutely crushing it. Next week, it's a totally different show. I'm bringing you a guy who loves to snowboard when he's not focused on kicking the football in the NFL. Unfortunately for him, he's had a lot of time to snowboard lately as he's done some terrible things, and with every action, there is a consequence. We'll talk about his trials and tribulations throughout his life on the show. Until then, please review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. Tell your friends about the show. Finally, I need to thank my sponsors, Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Without them, it wouldn't happen. I also want to thank you. Have a great week, everyone.